Being a fan is hard. Fandoms come in many forms, and fandom is expressed in many different ways, but there's always a certain amount of effort that being a fan entails. Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice and its sequels are goddamn fantastic, and I desperately want to be able to talk about it with someone. My fandom of the series becomes hard work for those that I try to push it on. My constant recommendations of feminist sci-fi rooted in post-colonial themes must wear on their patience. Sometimes fandom means justifying something, explaining or exploring why something is good, not just because you enjoyed it, but because it's clever, interesting, or valuable in and of itself. Kill la Kill is one of my favourite shows, but I feel I can't just say that I love it without qualifying that view. Whoa, that fan service is pretty ridiculous, huh? But wait, at around episode 4 you'll start to understand why it's there. But of course these explanations don't fully explain the ridiculous extent of the fan service that is often present, nor does it excuse the flaws the series has. Being a fan often makes it hard to admit, this is flawed. Being a fan also brings high expectations. Expectations a subsequent series or sequel won't always meet. Half-Life ranks among the very best games I've played, but Half-Life 2 couldn't excite me in the same way. Avatar: The Last Airbender was a formative part of my childhood, and indeed my whole life thus far. The Legend of Korra, meanwhile, even though I think it's pretty good overall, bar some particularly large missteps in Season 2, was disappointing in comparison. Catch-22 is perhaps my all-time favourite book, but I'll never even read any of Joseph Heller's other work because it could only disappoint given my ludicrous admiration for the book through which I was first exposed to his writing. Being a fan is hard, so in this video I'm going to discuss fandom and how it has affected the way I interact with some of my favourite media. As fans, we all know the feeling. You know how great this moment is, or that episode, or this season. And even if you like the earlier moments of a series, a book, a movie, there's that one moment, that one scene you think is special. That's the third season of Korra for me. In trying to recommend it though, I sound a little sheepish. Season 3 is great, but you've just got to get over the comparatively average Season 1 and maybe skip Season 2. Actually watch the Avatar 1 episodes, but skip the rest. It sounds pretty unappealing when I put it that way, but the opinions others have for the third season is important to me. While I can understand disliking Season 1, and especially Season 2, I really worry people won't like Season 3, or won't get to it because of Season 2. Being a fan often means identifying with something, in some way constructing one's own identity through that something. I'm a huge fan of the third season, and as a result it's somehow personal when someone reacts to it. Being a fan is kind of weird sometimes. Next, I've got to touch upon Kill la Kill. I love Kill la Kill. Somehow that's a tough sentence to say without immediately justifying it. But there it is. I love Kill la Kill. The reason it's so hard to proclaim love for the series is immediately obvious. It doesn't appear to reflect my personal politics. In fact, at first, it seems to outright oppose them. I am, as you've likely gathered by now, not a fan of fan service. It's gross, it's petty, and god damn it Japan, why do you keep doing it with underage girls? Fan service, in all its flavours, makes me deeply uncomfortable. The fact I love Kill la Kill then also makes me uncomfortable. On the surface, it hardly looks like the sort of media I'd typically want to watch, and indeed, I didn't expect to enjoy it when I started. I still don't like that the first introduction to Senketsu feels rather rapey. The fan service is pretty on the nose, and a lot of the dialogue is outright dumb. This is flawed. But there were elements I liked, and eventually those elements all but excused those flaws. Later in the series, the fan service is equal opportunity with just as many abs and pecs on display as boobs and bums. That fan service is now justified in the narrative, however flimsy that narrative is, and the thematic exploration of fascism actually comes back to play a somewhat major role. That first impression of Kill la Kill is what I'm so embarrassed about. The impression I know the first episode will make is not why I want to describe myself as a fan, and trying to justify my fandom preemptively through feminist theory or assurances that the fan service gets better, or rather less problematic, doesn't sound too great either. I'm a fan of Kill la Kill, but it's hard to be one when my personal politics don't seem to line up with those of the series, at least in its opening episodes. Being a fan is sometimes at odds with how you typically behave. Next up, I want to touch on the music machine. The Music Machine is a game I genuinely think deserves more attention. Its art style is brilliant. I love the themes the rather sparse narrative is built on, and its atmosphere is absolutely peerless. I also want to be the one to bring it to other people. It's rather obscure, and to say that it's my discovery, it's my recommendation, that's a little ego boost that I somehow feel entitled to as a fan. Fandom doesn't only crop up as a shared appreciation of something, but also as a kind of elitist act, a performance of knowledge and snobbery. I bring this up in my discussion of the Music Machine because it's a game I want to champion. It's a game I'm a fan of, but it also feels somehow like it's mine because of that fandom. It's a bit of a toxic attitude I see in a lot of places. Anytime you see an argument begin with the line, "a real fan," you're probably looking at that side of fandom people should be a bit wary of. I'm a big fan of the Music Machine, but I need to be careful that my being a fan doesn't make me some kind of gatekeeper. I'm just a fan, and my fandom doesn't make me special. I know I said earlier I would be discussing some of my favourite media, but I want to bring up one final point of discussion in order to explore wider concepts of fandom that will hopefully be interesting to you. I want to talk about Australia. This video just took a weird turn, huh? If fandom is an expression of love for something that on occasion blinds one to the flaws of that thing, if it is a love for one thing, there is also something exclusionary about it. I wouldn't generally describe myself as a fan of the country in which I live. Loving a country somehow feels wrong. I can be a fan of people, a fan of art, a fan of music, of literature, of films, TV, games, and so much else. But not a country. Not this country. I certainly don't love the politics that currently govern Australia. I don't love our history, where, like so many other countries, Australia as it stands currently was built on soil soaked in the blood of Australia's first people. Worse still, Australia's Aboriginal peoples weren't even recognised as people by the European invaders. I do, however, love some of the experiences I've had in Australia, and perhaps my issues with Australia would match those I might have in any other country. I am a fan, as it were, of Australia's landscapes, of its animals and of its seas. The fact I can go with some friends for a day trip to a canyon as beautiful as this is incredible. I've swum with truly alien creatures and explored some beautiful landscapes, and I love that I can do so without touching my passport. Then there are the opportunities I've been afforded for growing up in Australia. My education and indeed this YouTube channel wouldn't exist without those opportunities. I have mixed feelings towards my country, as I'm sure most people do. So bear this in mind as I go on to discuss something that will initially sound entirely unrelated. Now I want to return to feminist sci-fi. You thought that was just a throwaway sentence in the intro to this video, huh? I'm returning to feminist sci-fi because my friends aren't only tired of me recommending the Ancillary Justice trilogy, I'm also constantly recommending Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. In it, Genly I asks Estevan what feelings they hold for their country. It is the reply to this question that I wish to quote here. How does one hate a country, or love one? I like the trick of it. I know people, I know towns, farms, hills and rivers and rocks. I know how the sun at sunset in autumn falls on the side of a certain ploughland in the hills. But what is the sense of giving a boundary to all that? Of giving it a name and ceasing to love where the name ceases to apply? What is love of one's country? Is it hate of one's uncountry? Insofar as I love life, I love the hills of the domain of Estray, but that sort of love does not have a boundary line of hate, and beyond that, I'm ignorant, I hope. To bring this discussion back to fandom, there are fans of Australia, and I'm sad to say most are horrible people. The sort of people Estevan's philosophy wouldn't sway. They are fans of what they narrowly define as Australian, and they hate everything else. It comes to the point where Australia's fans have taken the Australian flag and turned it into a symbol of hatred. Hatred for one's uncountry.
But the Australian flag to me has now become, I identify that with racism. Does anyone else?
Well, that's going to be a pretty controversial statement out there. I mean, why do you say that to start with?
Like, on Australia Day, you see a bunch of dudes walking around with their tops off and they're getting on the drink and all that. They've got an Australian flag wrapped around their neck. I've seen it so many times. Like, I've been in a taxi where we've pulled up because these dickheads have been walking across the road and they just start yelling at the taxi driver like, get out of the country, this is not your country, you know what I mean? And they're wearing Australian flags. Like, I've seen it so much, like, growing up, still today, you know what I mean? It's pathetic.
They define what they love by what it's surrounded by, that which they hate. Whether nationalism could be called a sort of fandom is questionable, of course, but I do see parallels between the way people identify with their country and the way people identify with their favourite media. There's often a dichotomy constructed between two fandoms, ignoring the many places they overlap. You'll see arguments about Seinfeld and Friends in which one is invariably called trash, while the other is held up on a pedestal. You'll see the same in comparisons between Radiohead and Coldplay. In my eyes, those arguments look awfully similar to discussions of countries and nationalities, the sort of us and them mentality I don't want to identify with. I've been the one in the past to make arguments about Friends and Seinfeld, or Coldplay and Radiohead, and that's where I think fandom becomes something a little harmful. I don't want to define myself through what I hate. I love The Legend of Korra's third season, but that love isn't bordered by hatred of the other seasons. I love Kill la Kill, but that doesn't mean I hate other anime. I love Radiohead, and I still hate Coldplay, but I'm trying not to. Being a fan is hard. Sometimes I feel the need to justify my taste to the world. Sometimes I feel a little self-important for what I'm a fan of. And sometimes I just desperately want people to like what I like. Fandom isn't always a comfortable relationship to have with media, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are you a fan of? Have you read Ancillary Justice? Dear God, I just want to talk about it with someone, it's driving me mental, none of my friends have read it yet. Is my comparison between fandom and nationalism totally off base? I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. Cheers, have a good one.